Hello, new interns. We are back, and today we have Sagar Kumath. I may not have pronounced that correctly. Could you say it once for us, Sagar?
Sagar Kumathe.
Sagar.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll move forward. I apologize. I don't want to mess it up anymore. But he is a product marketing intern, and that's all I'm going to say for now because he'll be introduced through the course of the questions, and you'll get to find out all about him. And he has a very interesting story. But first things first, I want to ask, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I think semester just started, so I think it's a bit tough right now. I think as we like ramp up, you're like trying to figure out how your classes are. It's my last semester, so
Oh,
trying not to give up on my like I don't know
right. You
senioritis
want
and
to
everything.
finish strong. You want to finish
Yeah.
strong. I totally get that. I have two more left, but I'm already feeling the kind of the decline of my energy. But also, if you ever want to apply to graduate school, it's like you have to keep the GPA up. So I get you on that. So speaking of schooling, the first question I want to ask is going to be, you know, where do you go to school now? Where
Mhm.
have you gone to school? Kind of what's your expected grad date? And then what's your major?
Mhm. Yeah, so right now I go to UC Berkeley, and as I mentioned, I'm in my last semester. I'm studying data science at the moment. I got into Berkeley and I started off as a computer science major actually, and I made the transition over to the data science. I wanted to be closer to the business. So with the data science degree, I'm also having an emphasis in business and industrial analytics, so I can kind of focus more so on that side. And I think it correlates more towards what I want to do in product. Before I came to Berkeley, I was actually a student at Sacramento City College. So I actually transferred into Berkeley after 2 years of doing community college, and there I was actually a computer science student. So
Oh,
now I
okay.
find myself at Berkeley, but yeah, I started off at the junior college.
Yeah, no, I love to hear that. Thanks for sharing. So now we're going to move into kind of, there's really three components to this. It's finding out very briefly what your role is and then how you got it. And then we'll go more in depth on what it actually is specifically. So
Mhm.
I want to ask you right now, kind of, what is your official job title? Very briefly, what do you do and who are you working for?
Right. So over this past summer, I conducted an internship at Samsung Semiconductor Inc. So just to be specific, there's two main Samsungs that we always hear about. There's Samsung Electronics, which is responsible for like maybe the cell phones, the TVs, the refrigerators, and that sort of stuff. And there's Samsung Semiconductor, which is purely about the semiconductor business. So whatever chips are going into those phones, what chips are going into those refrigerators and things along that. That's kind of what Samsung Semiconductor does. So that's the side I was on. And in terms of that, I was on the storage side. So think about like SSDs and DRAM, and I was on the SSD side, but Samsung has like both offerings available. And yeah, there's a product marketing intern. Essentially, what I was doing was I guess the best way to define the role is I think most people they characterize marketing as being maybe like making like spreadsheets or not even spreadsheets, but even just like marketing collateral, like posters.
Sure.
Product marketing is a bit different in the way of we're more so like the informant of both the sales organization on our side and even the executive level. So marketing means overall like evaluating the entire market and seeing how the economy is doing, see how our own sector is doing, how Samsung is doing in the market versus our competitors, and kind of like along those lines. So it's not unfortunately I wasn't making posters. It was more so about like learning to digest like financial data and stuff like along those lines to basically learn how to market Samsung against I guess like everybody else.
Well, and you mentioned, I mean, just a few things that stood out to me. You said you're more of an informant at multiple levels. So you mentioned executives and then all the way down to maybe just other groups. And well, we're going to get into that, but if you could you break that down do you mean that you work in a capacity where um, those are the types of roles where instead of making flyers, you're actually kind of digesting information and then giving valuable information back out, or is that kind of an oversimplification?
No, that's actually exactly what we do, Sean. So instead of again doing like the marketing and communications, which is like more so Marcom, we're
Yeah.
more of product marketing in terms of we have our own offerings of products, and we're sort of positioning that by taking in a large array of data and basically processing and finding whatever is relevant to us to basically enable our own teams that we're able to continue to. I mean, Samsung is a very big dominator in the SSD and the storage market. So just how do you continue to enable that, and seeing like where there's maybe like pressure points, pain points, maybe areas that we can go after, and especially like along those lines. So that's generally just like that's what I would envision the product marketing anywhere as being in general.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And you also mentioned SSD and DRAM. Now, for people who know what that means, I'm going to look really dumb, but like, just really, is that just types of storage? What is that?
Right. So SSD stands for solid state drive. So what you have in your laptop right now is an SSD. That's basically what you're storing everything onto. So your C drive is like an SSD. So SSD has a lot of different applications. So it can also be in your laptop. It can be like in a data center. It can be used in very like, even like refrigerators. Like they have storage now. So like even you'll see it in a refrigerator. And then DRAM, in terms of like the technological like standpoint, it's a little bit more advanced or quicker than an SSD. So basically, what's happening is your computer has a processor. So the processor needs to be able to compute data. So that data that's the computer's directly processing on is the DRAM. And so once you have memory that's processed and ready to be stored, then it goes onto the SSD. So Samsung is basically covering both of those niches, and we sort of rely on like people that are making chips, like think of like Intel, AMD, NVIDIA. So it's just like kind of how the relationships in the business work.
Got it. Thank you. So moving on, kind of thinking about how you were able to secure this position, I want to know right from really the foundation of when you started, did you apply for this job on a job site, or did you maybe have a referral, or were you even reached out to by Samsung Semiconductor? How did you come into this position?
I think some of us may be familiar with it, but like Handshake, I think our school has Handshake. So I was told, from what I was told to believe, was that Handshake is not very useful and that nothing ever comes out of it. But funnily enough, I was just in class, I think one day bored, and I was just applying to as many jobs as I could on Handshake, and just like, across Semiconductor. I think I came across one job on Samsung, and I just like, oh, okay, I can apply to these roles. And so I went to Samsung's website and just went through the normal like process of applying, and I think a few months later I was reached out to. So
how many, what were you kind of entering in, what were you searching for in Handshake? Because I know you have to put in some keywords, some key roles. What were those kind of those terms or positions you were looking for?
So just to speak a little bit back to whatever experience I had, so I had worked previously at Intel as a product marketing engineer. So that's very similar to the product marketing role, but it was more so technical. That's why the engineering part comes in. So it's a positioning, but it's rather than like more of, I guess, a market and financial sort of standpoint, it was more about the technical standpoint and like the comparisons and differences. So I already had an idea if I wanted to be in product marketing, but also there's product marketing, product management, project management. There's a lot of things along those lines. So that's really what I was searching for in terms of when I was doing an internship search. That's like, those are the types of roles I was looking for.
Got it.
Handshake, just internship, product. So whatever I saw.
Heard it here first. Handshake is the way to go. I've been lacking on using Handshake, but I might have to go back. How many applications would you say that you sent out before receiving before hearing back from this specific employer? Was it like 100 or 15? Kind of where were you in that range?
Do you mean in terms of applications to Samsung specifically, or to like in general?
Some total of, kind of whenever you would say that you started your application process or this round of applying, how many did you send out? How many class periods were you kind of applying to? And like, if you were to take them all and add them up, how many was it before you kind of got reached out by Samsung?
I think I still have an Excel spreadsheet. Every time I apply to something, I document it. So I think my spreadsheet was like 110, 115 about, and I was still continuing to apply. So I think I started my applications in about like November, like October, November, and I think I continued till February. So
you worked hard to get that role. I sent out around 50, and I got mostly rejections, actually all rejections. But I thought that I was applying to a lot, but you got to just keep going, I guess, right?
Yeah, I
That's
think it's very important to kind of set a goal. I think, and the main thing is, it's one thing to say that you applied to like over 100 jobs, but it's like if it's 100 jobs that like not only are you qualified for, but do you have the experience and background that you can sort of, even if you get into the interviews, like can you like really like talk about it and talk about your
right.
past experiences and show kind of showing the face value of yourself to the company.
That
And
makes
so I wasn't necessarily going in and like I wasn't editing my resume for each individual job, but I would have like an array of resumes, like maybe one for product management, one for product marketing, project management, like even supply chain along those lines of kind of like highlighting what I envision is like what they're looking for in terms of those roles. Uh,
nice. Yeah, and that's a good idea too. Have multiple resumes.
mhm.
Um, what would you say, given your previous experience, why do you think, if you were to get into the minds of the hiring managers, why do you think you got that role? What was it about your experience that earned you the role? And then also, if your personality played a part, kind of what was the ratio between experience and then you personally that earned it?
Personality. I think definitely in terms of like how a product works, I feel, and even like when I'm here at school and I'm interacting with people, like there's a lot of people that want to do product management. I think everybody wants to do it at some point. Either like even if they're aiming to be a software engineer right now, like oh yeah, I'll jump into product management later on or some kind of management, right? So
It's coveted.
it's hot. It's a hot thing. Data science and product management, they're very hot right now. And I think everybody wants to sort of do that. And so how do you sort of play into that role and what are they kind of looking for? So I mean the product management and product marketing, anything that has to do with product, I think it's more so about the communication is primary because the main role is that you're going to be acting as a bridge amongst a bunch of invested parties. So being able to not only be very organized, very well organized, detail oriented, but also being able to effectively communicate. So I like talking. I don't. It's not something that I shy away from. I don't have too much of an issue like going around and talking to people.
Right.
And that's very important, especially I think. I luckily I had some experience in terms of product marketing. I think I did almost 3 internships in like
Oh
that sort of field. So like
my goodness.
I guess I could sort of like ramp myself up and keep on building on upon that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say it's just definitely the communication and being able to basically empathize with all invested parties, not just your own engineering team, but also the customer themselves, and sort of how can you help them by helping yourself. I think that's like a good way of thinking about it. I don't think I. Sorry, can you go
So,
back to the first part of the question? I think I answered.
oh yeah, no, you answered it, but I mean, if you were to kind of give your thoughts on what was the most important, or if they were equivalent, which, because you mentioned the communication aspect is essential, but obviously, people without your previous internships, you mentioned 3, most likely wouldn't have gotten the interview. Like, were they more heavily focused during the interviews, or during the process on just your experience, or did it start appearing like they were interested in how you would fit within their company culture? What was kind of that atmosphere?
Right. So I mean the specific niche that I was in for both sides is hardware. So I think how you really like basically separate tech now is between the software side and the hardware side. So hardware being like semiconductor or even like a lab, like the product itself. And then the software is more so about the writing of the code and sort of managing that side of it.
Mhm.
So I had experience not only on the hardware side, but specifically in the storage industry. That's what I was doing previously at Intel. So
Got
that's sort of like something that they could definitely like see that I had familiarity with in terms of I knew all the competitors in the space. I knew whose offerings was what. I knew what a necessity is made up of, how it actually works, sort of
Mhm.
those things. So it wasn't necessarily like I was coming in like fresh and I needed to be trained and updated. I sort of already had an idea of the role. Obviously, each company is very, very different and how they approach everything is different. So obviously I would need to learn that. So yeah, I think definitely to getting your foot into the door, I think they were definitely looking for sort of past experience in terms of I didn't need to like ramp up completely afresh. It was more so just like getting caught up in terms of what I missed out on. And then yeah, I think from that part, that was sort of like how the beginning of the process works. They just want to know what your familiarity was with. And then yeah, they start to sort of like try to assess like if you're a fit for the team, like what sort of qualities you possess. Do they think you'll be able to like really take the job and run away with it? Because honestly, a 3 month internship is not very long. And I think most of the time it takes at least a month or two to ramp up. So that probably leaves you with like about a month of actually like producing like high quality work, if you can even call it that, in terms of a 3 month period.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Um, and when was your first internship that you kind of pursued? What kind of year were you? Were you freshman in college, or like was it even back in high school? Because you mentioned there were three.
Mhm. So to sort of just give like a timeline in terms of like internships. So I think I had 5 internships total
Wow.
from the start of college, from the first year. So even when I was at the community college, I was actually doing internships. So the first internship was for a company called R Systems, and that's sort of a technology, I guess, like contracting firm. So they're just a team of engineers basically, and whatever, if a company will come to them with like a problem, or they think that they have like engineers to offer to help them with a project, that's sort of like where they go to. So that was more on the IoT, Internet of Things side, meaning like Internet of Things, I guess how you can envision it is being more so you have any device, and if it's connected to the internet, it's collecting data and it's processing things. So that's kind of what IoT is, like it's signals and sensors and sort of just collecting data, and like how do you take that data and sort of process it.
Mhm.
From there, I transitioned. I actually worked for the California State Treasurer's Office, and there I was just in the IT department. So the typical IT
Nice.
guy that was helping set up the computers or even like setting up passwords. It was a great job to have while in school.
I'd
Great learning
imagine.
experience, because you get to, the main thing about the state and how the government works is a lot of the people there are coming from the private sector. So you're able to make a lot of connections and really like sort of gain a lot of insight into sort of what you want to do. Um,
Nice.
yeah, and then from there, yeah, I transitioned over to Intel as a product marketing engineer. And so I did 2 summers there. So
Okay.
actually, my first internship was for 7 months, and the second one was for 3 months, so just for the summer. And
Mhm.
then, yeah, most recently, I just did an internship at Samsung. So I guess I've been working like all of college. Very lucky. So, yeah.
And it's paying off, and I'm sure once you get that, it's really going to be huge. I'm sure that's an incredible job history that I just heard. Seriously, that's definitely up there in all the profiles I've seen. So really, congrats to that. Now, I want to start breaking down your role in particular, even though you've actually explained a significant portion of it, but you've also really given us context on like your industry and specifically, product marketing, what that is, and product management. Um, okay, well, yeah. And before I ask you even to give me an overview, how many hours per week do you work in this internship? And then were there any other interns that you worked with in like a cohort, or was it more attached to like a supervisor?
Right. So, in terms of my own team, there were 2 interns, but we were sort of in 2 different sectors. So our work was related, but the industries or like the sectors that we were working in were completely different. So we didn't really have the chance to sort of operate together. In
Mhm.
terms of the entire cohort, so yeah, Samsung has a really great internship program. They do a really good job. So I think in San Jose we had 50 plus interns, and I think in Samsung overall there was like 80 plus interns this summer. And a big makeup of that was of PhD and master students. So there were
Oh,
not many undergrads actually. So it was, for me, it's a really weird experience, right? It's like, oh, you guys are interns. Oh, wait, you're a PhD student. Like, wow, that's very impressive to me,
yeah,
right? Just whoa, you're here and you're working, but when you go back to school, you're like top dog, you're PhD. So
right.
really,
That's definitely an interesting. I haven't heard of that either, of other interns being exposed to master, graduate level degree people. That's awesome.
right.
Um, could could you give us a kind of an overview? I want to kind of have an overview of what you've done during this internship, and of course you can choose if omit stuff or add stuff. But if you were kind of explaining this to someone who this topic's really foreign to them, how could you give us a taste of everything you've done, and then afterwards we can delve into like something you're most proud of.
Mhm. So I think I did miss a question before. So I was working about 40 hours a week. Um,
Oh yes.
yeah, so I was working about 40 hours a week, just it was just 8 hours a day. I obviously, like, I was working maybe a little more every once in a while. It's basically just doing work until the work was done. But yeah, they were really great about the hours, and especially like work life balance and flexibility. There definitely didn't seem to be too much pressure. It was sort of whatever was manageable is whatever you were able to do.
Great.
But it kind of speaking, I guess, more so to the role itself and a bit of specificity that I can offer.
Mhm.
So basically, the role as an intern, marketing is very important, and the decisions that you and the insight that you provide is very, very not only is it confidential, but it's also like very meaningful. So there's a lot of stakeholders involved. As an intern, I think it's a very high pressure upon myself and even like upon the team, because you can't be trusting an intern with work that's far too important or like basically like vital to business operations. So more so, I think, and even not only the interns, but even like the entry level roles is more so about supporting the current existing maybe managers and
Hmm.
people like the real people that are actually driving the decision making process and marketing process. So in terms of that, for me, it was helping support, maybe providing marketing collateral, maybe helping, maybe like sitting in on a lot of meetings, just even being there to even take on notes, so that when we're reporting our own information and gathering, that's very important. If somebody's there to not only be able to take notes, but also digest it, so that it's able to be easily read and understood by anybody that's at the higher level. Because if you're at the senior level, you're not only responsible for one specific product or one specific customer, you're responsible for the entire array of products. So you need everything at a high level, and that's very important, of being able to break down information, that's a lot of information, and break it down to where it's like very clear and concise. So that's sort of my role, is mainly making not only just collateral, but also being able to take and process the information, so that at the higher levels, it was very easily digestible, so that we could get guidance from that.
Sure. I mean, so it sounds like there's a lot of it's very high level support. I mean, it's not you're not sitting in on like a local Jamba Juice's product marketing. Not to talk down on if that's even a role, but that makes sense. It's very high stakes. There's a lot of liability associated with. They have to give interns, the right type of work.
Mhm.
So I love. Okay, you mentioned marketing collateral and sitting in on meetings, but having to really, really understand what's going on to be able to digest it and I guess make it palatable and useful for other people. Um, can you go in depth on, if you have time, if you could on everything, but if that's too much, then maybe focus on a corner and really dive deep on sharing with us like for the note taking, what types of meeting was there a meeting for every type of product, since you have to be aware of like everything that you mentioned. Yeah, if you could just tell us a little bit about that, what you're most proud of, something. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is like sort of like where you kind of delve into the gray area of like what you're allowed to talk about and not.
Oh,
So if
sure.
I'm
Yeah, no,
being if I'm being a little vague, my apologies. But
that's yeah.
basically how that's approached, especially like in terms of note taking, I think I won't speak too much to what I was doing specifically, but I think in general,
Yeah.
being able to clearly and concisely, as I'm repeating myself, basically, there's a lot of information that's being thrown at us, and we have like Samsung is not just a small company. It has There's an array of products. There's a multitude of stakeholders, not only internally but externally. There's not just our own product, but there's other products that may like impact whether we're able to maybe sell more, or if we have maybe like a supply chain issue or something along those lines, and sort of trying to be able to understand that. So it's understanding the industry as a whole. So how
Okay.
do you do that? The hardware and the technology industry is very big. So I don't know, if Google says one thing, how does it affect us, right? So if
Right.
Apple says one thing, how does it affect us? Oh no, the government's doing something, like how will it affect you? And that's just product marketing in general. It's understanding the entire market and kind of how it's being impacted. Um,
That's incredible. That's understanding the entire market and understanding its impact. That's at face value. That sounds impossible, but obviously it's broken. You have to break it down and be aware of all the moving parts. Wow, that's pretty challenging. But I do feel like I understand your role to an extent, to a good extent. Obviously, the details, of course, you can't with a company like Samsung Semiconductor, you can't be spilling which clients or what items you were talking about. So fair enough. But thank you for sharing that. I do appreciate it. Now, let me look here. So I just want to go over maybe some final thoughts you may have. Um, First off, what is, in your opinion, the most valuable thing you have learned from this um, most recent internship?
I think for me, it was definitely a lot of personal growth, especially in terms of the office skills and just interpersonal skills. I think a lot of, especially like my whatever work I had done Intel in the past, that was all done online. So rather than being able to meet somebody in person, it was setting up, like if you wanted to introduce yourself, it was setting up a one-on-one meeting and kind of introducing yourself in that
Cool.
way, in that manner. And now, luckily, the internship, and it was very luckily, the internship was in person over the past summer at Samsung. So now it kind of shifted over more so to like you just like go up and shake somebody's hand, or you see somebody around the office. Hey, I recognize you. Who are you? Like, what do you do here? Right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's sort of that's why it was also very important to sort of be around the office to sort of build like a name for yourself in terms of people will recognize you if you're at the office all the time. People are going to call you out for that, and maybe you'll be appreciated for it. Which Samsung did a really great job, and everybody there they were very appreciative of any of the work that any of the interns could provide, and that was very like endearing. It made you want to work hard. And you
Yeah.
definitely felt valued and appreciated. Um, and sort of learning how to navigate those interpersonal skills of networking and sort of you also to a certain extent as an intern want to demonstrate that you're capable of doing a job, and it's just kind of how to find that balance, and that was very important for me.
That's awesome. And I'm glad that you're an advocate, or, based on what you've said, I feel like you're an advocate for being in person at your work. Now, there's different circumstances, but I've personally always loved going into the office and seeing the people. So for all you like pro remote work people, you got to listen to this, because there's real benefit to going in person. It's not just like it's not whatever. So thanks for sharing that. And you know what? The last question I have, it's a very important one, would be if there is any advice that you'd like to give to people who are applying to similar internships and internships in general.
For a similar internship, I think if you have a background in any sort of hardware engineering, I think you're going to be very highly sought after. I think being able to understand sort of the technological component of anything is very important, and sort of I guess how like even we discuss it here at school is I think it's very tough to learn the engineering and the sciences part of technology, but then the business skills is sort of something that they can be picked up on. But actually, I don't think that's true in reality. I think being able to develop the skills in terms of learning how to network and talk to people, if you're going to approach a job like this where a lot of it is face-to-face contact and just being able to communicate with people, I think that's very important. So sort of putting yourself in, even if you're not comfortable with like going out and talking to people, like putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation, not really like being afraid to talk. I think that's very important. That's kind of like the skill I developed. I think that's the biggest change in terms of how my job has maybe affected my personal life is sort of, I think I was more shy and timid, and I think I was content with being just like on the engineering side, and now I'm more so about being the outgoing and staying more on the business side. And I think that's also reflected in my education. Why did I make the transition over from computer science to data science, and why did I want to like have an emphasis in business? It's specifically like sort of that reasoning. It's like you learn what you're good at and how to sort of help develop yourself into being that role.
Yeah. Well, and I'd just like to say that I personally, you mentioning that it affected even down to your personality and you improved a lot, objectively in terms of your communication and speaking to people. When we first started this, before we even started recording, you struck me totally as a complete extrovert. So you mentioning that you maybe were possibly a little timid before is like, that's kind of mind blowing. So it really did do something. I think that's really cool.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, and I guess like kind of speaking to internships in general, I I think I do try to go out of my way sometimes to help people, especially like the younger kids, like the guys that are just starting off. And I think, especially here at Berkeley, it's a very big culture of people like to like show off like their jobs
oh
sometimes in terms of like, working, and I'm working here and there. And I especially when you're a freshman and you're brand new, and like some in some cases like you've had no exposure to like a big tech company, like what it's like working for one, or even just being in like a CS class in general, while you have some of your classmates that have like they have their own apps on the Apple's like the Apple App Store. Like that's crazy, right?
yeah,
And I think it's very important in terms of like you should focus on your not don't focus on yourself, but don't worry about somebody else's path. And I think sometimes I think if you worry too much about the internships, or even like if you try too hard, sometimes you might be taking away from yourself because you also want to remain authentic. I don't think when you're going into an interview, especially it gets to a certain extent of, okay, fine, they know what you know, but now they're trying to see who you are as a human being, because there's an element of you're a smart person and then you're capable of doing the job, and then there's another element of now you're not just joining a company, you're joining a team. So how are you going to mesh into that team and sort of bring that authenticity, bring some sort of personality and things along those lines. So in the interviewing phase, I think that's very important to no, don't be a robot that like wrote this
Right.
to read off of that. Be like dynamic and be able to show who you really are. I think that's like really important.
Man, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for telling us that. I could not agree more. And it's interesting doing all these interviews. There's certain commonalities that get pulled out of the advice that each individual gives. And one of the things that I just heard you mention, which is at a certain point, if you are able to get into an interview, there's an understanding that you have the skills, you have the talents, and you need to be a person. You need to be an individual, and they care about seeing that personality come through. So, thank you, Sagar, for this wonderful interview. I, you know, we will link his Instagram below, or any other links that he would like for you to be able to reach out to him on. And so for now, I just want to say take care and thank you so much for this. I'll see you next time. We'll stay connected.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if anybody has any questions, not only about like the job process, but even like the transferring process, I'd definitely love to help on that. So just putting that out there.
Awesome. You heard him. Reach out. All right. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you, John.